Thank you very much, Frank, for the introduction, and of course, it's a great honor to be here. So, like Frank just said, I'm a member of Men's Voices. I am a scientist, chemist, working down the road in Trinity for my PhD, which is not the typical background you'd expect for somebody involved in these kind of things. That's not why I was asked to speak. I was just asked to talk today because I'm a young man, as maybe apparent. All the guys in Men's Voices, they're a great bunch of guys. I've known them for about 2 years now, maybe a little less than that. And I suppose they have years of experience in this area, activism, helping men, but I have about 20 years on most of them at minimum. And so the question is, why is that? Why don't you see you sort of young guys like me speaking up about these things? And so I was asked to talk about that. And I went away. Normally when I give these kind of talks, I'm talking to a room full of scientists who want to tear holes in you if you say anything that's wrong. So I went to a very technical look, not just at the facts as they are out in the world, but also inside myself. And I came back and I had 3 main topics I'm going to talk about today. And those topics are ignorance, agency, and shame. So I'm going to start with ignorance because I want to front load all of the man bashing in my talk, because to be honest, a lot of the problem around these issues is that there's simply ignorance of the issues among men, and women, by the way, but young men in particular. And so I'm going to be covering a lot of ground that was already covered by the previous speakers, but essentially, when you think of the public dialogue on men's issues, you kind of get 2 perspectives out there. The first is not going to be a big surprise to anyone who's up in the newspaper. It's this sensational idea of, men have privilege, they are the dominant people in society, the world was set up by them, for them, and for their benefit. Maybe they have a couple of problems here and there. The odd guy might be having a bad time, but it's not a systemic problem. But, reality has a horrible way of getting in the way of ideologies. And the quiet reality is that, in actual fact, the problems that are going around now for men of all ages are systemic. And they are not being viewed that way. And a lot of the problems around this are going to be because of media. So I'm going to do a bit of media bashing in this as well. Now, I realize most people here, perhaps I'm preaching a bit to the converted, but just if there's anyone here who perhaps is doubting this or thinking that this is mad, I put these following slides into my presentation for their benefit. So recently there was, of course, the annual pronouncement from the media about the wage gap. Women are working for free from whatever day it was in November until the end of the year. And so I want to talk about the rights gap. And again, this has been very well trodden from the other speakers. But basically, when you take a look just objectively at the current legal affairs, fathers are not being treated very well by society. They don't have the same rights as mothers when they're married, and you know what happens if they get married, taking a huge risk, and in the event of a breakdown, they are the biggest losers. Okay? And okay, that's rights. And again, as I said, people have covered it quite well in their talks. I'm not going to dwell on it too much. With regards to services, this is a quote from our 2005 study that was done by the National Crime Council, the ESRI, into domestic violence. And we know from this study that very, very large numbers of men are expected to be victims of domestic violence every year in this country. And again, if the sensational view of men that's in the media were true, you would expect that these men who are in charge of everything would have set things up so that whenever they have any problem, the services will be there for them, they'd have their back. Again, a bit of a technical scientific view on it. Take a look at number X, how many men are being victimized, number Y, how many services do they have to compensate them or help them, and of course there's a bit of a problem here because there are no shelters for them. There's only a single organisation advocating for them, which is in a single county in Ireland. And so if you are a victim of abuse, a man in Donegal, you're expected to get in a car and drive to Meath just to talk to a counsellor, or even just to get some advice. And from a raw quantitative point of view, you can expect less than 1% of the spending on those services to be allocated to you, in spite of the fact that the numbers don't seem to bear that out. And of course, there's always talk about we need more funding for these victims. We do need more funding for all victims, but we also need to look at the balance of how it's being distributed, because it doesn't work for me. So, like I said, I'm a very scientific kind of guy looking at numbers. These numbers don't seem right to me. So, when we talk about ignorance and masculinity, the media loves this topic. Of course, there are negative consequences to this sort of cavalier attitude among young men. You hear about car accidents, you hear about death by misadventure and all this kind of thing. But, you know, being kind of cocksure or being throwing caution to the wind is kind of the driving force behind entrepreneurship. It's the driving force behind leadership, it's status. So that's why men seek it out, because that's what they want to be innovators and entrepreneurs. They want to support families. They want to be high status people. But the point is, if you combine this attitude of absolutely grand with a general ignorance of the actual issues as they are in society, that's a deadly combination. And I emphasize deadly, as we talked about suicide, domestic violence, all these really important issues. If you're not aware of them, you are not aware of them at your own peril. And this leads me to segue on to the next topic. I'm going to focus on how we've heard from Derek about the academic consensus, we've heard about the media conceptions. These are all encouraging ignorance around these issues. They're not encouraging enlightenment. That's a problem. So, that's part one out of the way. Bit of man bashing, I acknowledge, but well, you have to have some self-reflection as well. The next topic I thought about was agency. And defining that as basically the ability to act independently for yourself. And traditionally, men and masculinity are intertwined with agency. It's very important to show agency. For example, if you are the head of the house, the breadwinner, your agency is not just for yourself, it's for your whole family. Conversely, again, this is just an observation, my own observation, we typically tend to downplay female agency. And as an example, you can look at any of the cases, you can find hundreds of them, where you have a female teacher or someone in a senior role, you know, preying upon a teenage boy. And it's always downplayed as sort of a strange forbidden romance or a rom. I encourage you to go look it up and you'll find it almost always described that way. Of course, if it was a male aggressor, it would be predator, victimizer, and a terrible person. But with the topic of agency, I'm not just talking about chivalry and traditionalism, because this attitude towards male and female agency hasn't gone anywhere in the modern progressive world. And if I had to sum up the attitude that still exists for many men today, not just, again, I'm really trying to stress this, it's not just a women's issue in this. You know, men are doing this themselves as well. Basically, it's this. That's the image of it. And so if we do a very, very abridged history of male agency from the dawn of society until now, it's been men are the ones with agency in society, and so it's their job to not just to protect themselves, but also to protect women as well. And decades later, after a lot of activism, again, much of it will be feminist activism, we have this notion of equality that is, you know, it's more of a, it has to be the case, because equality. However, there's always that comma, however, it's still men's job to be the ones fixing things, protecting women, because they have the agency still. So it never changed, despite all these years of activism. Male agency, another word for it, I would say, would be collective responsibility. So if you are a man, you are collectively responsible for everything that other men do, and in fact, everyone's misdeeds, and it's your job to correct the mistakes of a single man in society. I put this image here from a UN campaign called He for She, which was encouraging men to come forward and advocate for women's issues, because gender equality is your issue too. That's very good. I would encourage it, of course, but there really needs to be she for he as well. That's what it should have been, I think. And in fact, if you look up this campaign, you look at all of the money poured into it, something similar coming from the UN for encouraging women to stand up for men would have done a lot more for what we're trying to do today. Okay. So, this agency topic, it's not just some sort of an abstract, high-minded idea. It has real-world practical effects on explaining the reasons why these issues aren't properly being dealt with. So these are just some, again, sorry for the technicality, I'm a scientist, old habits die hard. I need some numbers. As Andy mentioned in his talk about the third level education disparity among women and men. And of course you hear endlessly about STEM disparity, the fact that there's fewer women in STEM, and science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. And what you don't tend to hear about is that the numbers in general swing this way. So I was a very traditionalist, and they use pink for female and blue for male. You can see that in almost everything else, other than STEM, it's gone the other way around. And the point I want to make here is that 30-some years ago, when these numbers were like that, but the other way around, so when it was 60-40 male-female, that was a prima facie case for discrimination and sexism and so on. But now the shoe is on the other foot, and there's this huge amount of inertia around actually doing something about it. We've had no response from the people who are now talking endlessly about the upper echelon of professorships in university and how they're going to lose funding if they don't do something about it. And yet, these are the numbers falling as they are just in university, not a professor, not one of the top earners in society, and silence. And so if I had to summarize it in 2 sentences, the idea of male versus female agency, and again, I want to stress, this is not attacking women or attacking how we deal with women. Generally, when a problem is affecting women, we look immediately at how we need to change the environment to fix it. When it's affecting men, we look at how men need to change themselves. Now, like I said, entrepreneurship, pull yourself up by your bootstraps, that kind of attitude brings about great leaders, CEOs, politicians, you name it. But sometimes you have to break down these conceptions of agency and look at, well, for the topic of this conference, we'll be looking at changing the environment to help men, because they can't always fix things for themselves. So if we're going to hope, I want to talk a little bit about the Men's Sheds initiative. It's been very popular in the last 5 or so years, and basically it was an answer to the idea that, oh, men don't open up, men don't talk, and they need to change men. And John Evoy here, who talked at our conference last year, he said, actually no, if you give them the right environment, if you have a little bit of deference to their needs, if you don't just expect them to pull themselves up by their bootstraps, that can go a long way. And in fact, this is completely grassroots movement, completely different from the typical conceptions of like counseling and face-to-face talking. Men have different needs, you give them the right environment and they will flourish. And so that's why I focused in on agency, because if you just expect them to get on with it, I think he had a very good saying. He said, if you were a shopkeeper and no one was buying your product, you wouldn't blame the customer, you'd look at how can you change your business. And so that's what they were doing with the Men's Sheds. And that's what we need to do in the whole discussion around men's issues. Not just point at men and say, you're toxic, you're a problem, you need to change in some fashion. There has to be some give as well in the environment. So, talked about people who are ignorant of the issues, talked about perhaps with agency. You might have someone who's very aware of the issues, but they think men need to sort it out themselves because they have these notions. What about people who are neither ignorant nor having these delusions about agency? And that's where I settled on shame. And I wanted to talk about the idea of male shame, which is a very specific type of shame. And I couldn't think of any better analogy to talk about it than to talk about the white feather movement. For those who don't know, the White Feather movement, the Order of the White Feather, was an organization set up in World War I when the British Army, which was a private army that didn't have conscription, was being decimated. And this admiral, Charles Fitzgerald, was looking for a way to encourage men to enlist, go into World War I, and basically get themselves blown up in what was, at that point, the most horrific war the world had ever seen. And his idea was very simple. He encouraged women in a small area, and then this gradually spread to the whole of Britain, to go up to men who appeared to to be not enlisted. So whether they were or not, there were plenty of stories of people who had in fact enlisted who were being shamed anyway. Anyway, he encouraged them to present this white feather of cowardice to these men. And it was an extremely successful campaign. It was so successful that you had boys as young as 15 lying about their age so they could go into the army and go off and serve the country. And when I was researching this, just to find some quotes about it, it said, you know, Fitzgerald understood that there's something that men were more afraid of than shells and chlorine gas. They were afraid of being seen as deficient, being seen as cowards, as failing mainly women and children, to stand up and be these protectors in society. This was 100 years ago. But the reason why I think it's still appropriate today is because we still have this Order of the White Feather knocking around. It just doesn't walk around in the street looking for men who aren't in uniform. It just bypasses that altogether. It uses mass media to execute this process of mass shaming. And you know, you'll see it all the time. If you just look at the attitude towards these issues, it is always, the blame is laid square at the feet of men, even if the issues are primarily affecting them, even if they've done absolutely nothing wrong, they are the biggest feminist advocates you could ask for. It's still their fault. You're collectively guilty because you're male. So, to be a bit provocative, I made this image. I didn't have to look very hard. I just went to what major dailies in Ireland say, and some of the dailies from the UK and the US say, and I just looked for what their journalists get away with. You heard about what Andrea Leadsom said earlier about, you know, don't hire a guy to be a childcare or a nursery practitioner or whatever because they're probably just pedophiles. Imagine any of these headlines being published and you take out men or boys and you replace it with a race or a sexual orientation. The journalist responsible, first of all, if the article even got published, the journalist's career would be over. He'd done. Vincent O'Toole would never write an article about how some ethnic group in Ireland needs to behave itself if he wants safety. Wouldn't happen. But we will do it to men. Because this concept of mass shaming, you know, it isn't just a World War I phenomenon. It isn't just some old patriarchal idea. It still exists in the modern, progressive, egalitarian society that we're trying to build. Because it's more fundamental than that. It's something about men that you're allowed to fashion them all you want. So, obviously, we run various online outlets for our work. We have social media and websites. We don't censor any comments. We don't stop people from posting like some other organizations will do. If you want to say something to us, you're more than free to do it. So here are a couple of comments we got, and most of these comments, by the way, are from men. I want to stress this, the male shaming phenomenon is not just white feathers, women walking with white feathers. Like I said, Charles Fitzgerald was a man, he had the perfect idea of getting men to enlist. Men perpetuate this onto each other. It is a societal problem, it is not a gendered one. So this one guy said, you know, you're moaning about it, these men's rights things. You're just making life harder for women by doing this. You need to grow up. Another response to a conference about men's issues like suicide was to list all the horrible things that some men have done in society. Again, I'm not sure why that means we're not allowed to get together once a year and have a conversation about these issues, but apparently to this person it does. My favorite one was to say that, you know, us having this conference, us trying to talk about these issues, was comparable to going into an A&E and asking them to look at your cough. So, suicide, homelessness, domestic violence, all these issues, that's just a cough. And we're moaning about it when there are bigger things, there are bigger fish to fry in society. These are from men. This is not from some coordinated group, just an average guy, happens upon our work, this is what he has to say about it. What he has to say about himself. So this idea of misandry, of men hating, it's not something external. There's a lot of internal self-hatred among men as well. And young men in particular, I see around me, people I grew up with, have internalized this toxic masculinity idea. One of my friends I grew up with, who probably knew really well, pronounced on his page, on his Facebook page, not too long ago that, you know, men, you need to stand up to toxic masculine behavior wherever you see it. Just pronounced this out of the blue. Where did he get it from? He got it from other men, he got it from the media, and he got it from within himself. He internalized it and said, that reflects me, that reflects people around me. That's what men do. So shaming is a tactic used to keep men in line. It is, at its core, traditional sounding, protector, provider, you know that kind of idea. But progressives and feminists and egalitarians and all these people who should be advocating for equality have really incorporated it into their repertoire of techniques. They've latched onto it quite handily. And so you always judge people by their deeds and their actions and not by what they profess to believe. And given this, is it any surprise that a young man doesn't want anything to do with this activism around their issues, advocating for their own positions? When they get this kind of backlash and this kind of shame, why would anyone be surprised that they would rather go onto some anonymous comment section on a forum or a newspaper and have their voice there, where it can't be visited back upon them in the form of abuse? And I also want to touch on how hypocritical our current conversation around we want mental health openness, we want men to talk is, when if a man opens his mouth and says something that they don't like, they're torn down immediately. You can't say you want people to open up and talk if when they do, you're going to police everything they say and smash them down if they say something you don't like. So, I'm the last speaker today. I do not want to end on that kind of negative note. Instead, I want to offer just a couple of practical suggestions, things that you can do. Not something, of course we need an opening to the dialogue, of course we need a men's advocacy network, of course we need a minister for men, but just some, what can you do today? So, ignorance, the best remedy is education. And there's no parent will here will stand and say that they wouldn't teach their young son, you know, if you're going out with your friends, stick with the group, don't go off on your own, and so on. So I think you should add a little bit of education on what they actually can expect to face in society as well. Because too often it's something terrible happens, a family court situation arises, an unmarried father has a child, and then they find out problems before they know anything. And then the activism starts after the negativity. Try and head that off. With regards to agency, people need to examine this idea of expecting men to pull themselves up by their bootstraps. Because it goes too far. In particular, when you project onto boys as young as 10, their failings in education as though they're supposed to fix it when they're children. But we do this. For shame, there's obviously a need to look inward. And if men are heaping this shame upon themselves and collectivizing it, perhaps they need to look at that themselves and ask, is this any different from the idea of original sin? That even if you haven't done anything wrong, you're carrying this burden from other people with you every day. The one thing I'd like to see done, if I could get one thing, it would be that any of these media figures, cowardly journalists, who say these things, heaping shame on men, collectivizing guilt on men, talking about all men as though they're horrific creatures, they should be treated exactly the same way as they would be if they said the same thing about women, about gay people, about particular racial groups. It's no different. It's neither better nor worse. And they would never write such a piece if people actually call them out for it the way they need to. And so the point of this conference, the point of my talk, the point of I think most people's talks, is to promote this dialogue. And that's what I want to see. I would love to see an opening up and welcoming for men to join the conversation for the national dialogue on gender equality to actually be about gender equality. To do that, you have to have more young men standing up for themselves. Thank you.